What's up, guys? Welcome to Haunted and Shit, a podcast where we talk about haunted shit and all things spooky, scary, creepy. I'm your host, and on today's very special first episode ever on Haunted and Shit, we are talking about the one and only Conjuring House. Before I get started, I just want to say thank you to everyone listening. I really appreciate your guys' support. If you want to check out Haunted and Shit on Instagram, it is at haunted.and.sh_t. There's also a link tree in my bio to get to all the different platforms that you can listen to the podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and give this video a like, leave a comment down below, and if you want to, hit that follow button. And before I start talking too much, let's get into the spooky shit. The Conjuring House was built in 1736 in Harrisville or Burrillville, Rhode Island. And for those of you who don't know the geography of Rhode Island, this is in the northwest corner of the state. It's actually one of the last towns before you hit the Massachusetts line. The property itself has a super dark history. Some of the things that have happened here are 2 suicides by hanging, 1 suicide by poison, rape and murder, 2 drownings, and 4 men froze to death on the property. So you can imagine it's super haunted. It's kind of like a beacon of negative energy and ghosts. And one of those ghosts that we're going to be talking about today, kind of our main character, if you will, is Bathsheba Sherman, who I'm sure some of you have heard that name before. And if you haven't, get ready for this crazy ass story. Bathsheba Sherman was born Bathsheba Thayer in 1812, and she married a man named Judson Sherman and moved into the house in Rhode Island in 1844. A lot of the information about Bathsheba is like word of mouth or rumors that occurred when she resided in Rhode Island, so there's not much actual historical evidence of any of these things happening, but these are the things that many people in the area that knew Bathsheba or knew of her have said about her. After she moved into the house with her husband, they ended up having a baby, and she gave birth to a son. At some point later on in the time that they were living at this house, she had allegedly been caught attempting to sacrifice a neighbor's child, like a baby, to the devil by stabbing it in the head with a large sewing needle. A lot of people say that the baby kind of just died while in her care and nobody really knew why, but some people have come out saying that this is the reason that the baby died. There were also a lot of rumors that Bathsheba and her husband had had 3 other children that all died before they reached the age of 7, but there were no census record of them anywhere, so nobody knows if that's true or not either. Other rumors about Bathsheba involved her starving and beating the people who worked on her and her husband's farm. And overall, Bathsheba had a really bad reputation. The people that lived around her and knew about her just did not like her, got bad vibes from her. And there were a lot of, these allegations towards her that she had been a pretty bad person. And of course, there were people that had said that she was a witch and had been performing witchcraft, and that's the reason why the baby died and everything. So that's where the title of her being a witch comes from as well. And in the late 1880s, Bathsheba did end up committing suicide, and her grave is located in Harrisville. So fast forwarding to the 1970s, this is the story that we all know and love, the Perrons moving into the Conjuring House. So Carolyn and Roger Perron moved into the Conjuring House in 1970. I call it the Conjuring House, but to them it was just a house. So they moved into this house in Rhode Island in 1970 with their 5 daughters. And not long after they moved in, they began to experience, weird things. The first stuff that they noticed was when they were doing something, they would turn around and something would be missing, like a broom or whatever they were using in that moment. And they would turn around and something would just not be there. They heard noises in other rooms that they knew were empty. The daughters began to start seeing figures in the house that they believed to be ghosts and spirits, but they thought that those figures that they saw were like, they weren't evil. They didn't feel evil, I guess. So they didn't really think anything bad was going to happen from those spirits. And after a period of time of this happening, the mother of the house kind of, you know, starts to get curious of like what the history of the house itself was that could maybe explain why all of these things are happening. So she, you know, starts doing research into the history of the house, and she eventually finds out that there have been some very gruesome deaths on the property. Like I mentioned earlier, there had been children who had drowned in a nearby creek, and a child was also murdered, and there were a couple of children that actually committed suicide in the house. So not only does this give an explanation for all of the like paranormal stuff going on, but it also, I can imagine, freaks the heck out of the family. And so now they start to get really freaked out and worried about, you know, we just moved into this house, we can't afford to move, what are we going to do about this haunting? And this is when they bring in Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are a couple of my favorite people. They actually started the New England Society for Psychic Research, which is the oldest ghost hunting group in New England, which I think is really cool. And, you know, after they did that, the thing that kind of shot them into fame was the Amityville hauntings, and they were the lead investigators on those as well. So Lorraine Warren was actually the person that connected Bathsheba to the haunting. She kind of like picked up her presence when she entered the property, and she was able to say that, you know, this was the demon that kind of had a grip on the family. And Lorraine Warren puts on a seance in 1974, and this is the seance or the exorcism that we see in the Conjuring movie, where she allegedly got possessed and she allegedly banished Bathsheba from the property. Now, fun fact, the exorcism that is shown in the movie The Conjuring didn't actually happen in real life. It was only a seance, and it was said by Lorraine Warren. She said that Ed would have never performed an exorcism to begin with because he wasn't a priest, and he knew that, like, you know, you can't perform an exorcism unless you're a priest. So that's kind of interesting because that's a really big part of the movie, obviously. That's like the climax of the movie. And it never happened. And as far as we know, after that seance happened, the Perron family didn't really experience anything else while they were living in the house. And eventually in 1980, when they could finally afford a new house, they did move out. And you know, after that, we didn't really hear anything from them, so it seems like everything that was haunting them was at the property. Now, something interesting that I actually didn't know, you know, I always believed that Bathsheba was the demon that haunted the Perron family, and that there really wasn't, you know, I had never heard of anybody else being the culprit for this, but I did read something where one of the daughters, Andrea, said that she had been tormented nightly by a female spirit with a bent neck that she believed had been hanged. And Bathsheba also hung herself, but Andrea believed that it actually wasn't Bathsheba that haunted her, and it was a different woman. And this is when I found out about a matriarch who had hung herself in the barn back in 1797. So this was like 100 years before Bathsheba had even killed herself. So completely different person, but also, you know, another really horrific death that happened on this property that just kind of adds to all of the negative energy that's going on. So we know, like, the history of this house. We know what happened before The Conjuring, but what happened after the Conjuring movie events? Like, what happened after the Perron family moved out? I feel like a lot of people don't hear about this part of it, and I learned a lot about the house itself and also the people that have lived in it. So after the parents had moved out, a man moved into the house, and he was going to renovate it and everything, and he had moved all of his stuff in, but apparently he had experienced something in the house so terrifying that it sent him screaming and running out of the house. He left all of his belongings behind, and he never returned. And I can't imagine what would make a grown man run out of a house and never return, but I mean, we can only guess that it's something absolutely horrible and something that I never want to see. But like I said, after that, the house, was empty. It sat vacant for years, and it wasn't until 1987 that a new owner came along, Norma Sutcliffe, and she was not exactly the person you would expect her to be. So Norma moved into this house, and basically She wanted to discredit everything that had been said about the house prior. All of the, stories and allegations of hauntings and exorcisms and seances and everything. She did not believe any of it. She did not believe this house was haunted. She thought that everything that happened could be explained by science. And she believed this so strongly that she actually spent a few years researching and gathering all of the evidence from all of the stories of this house to disprove it. And she actually put together a 1-hour video of her talking about all of the evidence, going through it, picking it apart, basically going like word for word and saying that is not true, that's not true, that's not true. And it's up on the internet if you guys want to go check it out. It's actually really interesting to hear a perspective of someone that does not believe any of this happened, because I feel like most people that I talk to about The Conjuring, they do believe it because there was a movie made about it and it's so popular. Everyone kind of just believes that it's true. But this lady, Norma Sutcliffe, lived in this house from 1987 to 2019, and she never, ever, ever changed her mind. She always believed that this stuff was not true, and eventually she just ended up selling the house. And this was in 2019, she sold it, and it was bought by new people, Corey and Jennifer Heinzen, who are actually paranormal investigators. So doing a whole 360 here, or 180, I guess. Doing a 180, we have paranormal investigators in the house now. So they, are not trying to do what Norma did, which was basically discredit all the evidence. They wanted to gather more evidence to prove that this place is haunted. And so they, set up all of their paranormal investigating equipment, and they also did experience most of the things that were said to have happened in the house in the past. They experienced noises and voices, footsteps. They said that they even saw a figure or a gathering of black mist, I believe was the way they explained it, that kind of just appeared and then disappeared. So not sure who that is, but it's got to be one of the ghosts. But now talking about present day, actually this year, 2022, in May, it was announced that the house was sold by Corey and Jennifer Heinzen to Jacqueline Nunez for $1.5 million, which was actually higher than the asking price of $1.2 million. So yeah, as of now, the house is owned by Jacqueline Nunez until the next owner comes along, I guess, until Jacqueline runs out of the house screaming and someone else comes and buys it. But as of right now, it is sitting in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and it's still haunted. Don't ask Norma that, though. She'll say it's not. So guys, you can watch the Conjuring movie if you want, have a nightmare or two, and then go live your life. But if you want to take it to the next level, the owner of the Conjuring House actually offers a lot of opportunities for the public to come and actually visit the house, stay the night, get a tour of the house. They'll even give you your own paranormal investigative equipment so you can do your own investigation on the property, which I think is so cool. All of the prices for these, tours and events and stuff are all on the Conjuring House website that I'll link below in the description of the podcast for you guys. That's where all of the links for all of the information and any websites or videos that I have mentioned in this podcast, all of that will be down below in the description. But if you are a brave enough soul, you can come and visit the Conjuring House, spend the night, see what it's all about, see if you think that all of this ghost stuff is true or not. If you make it out alive, if you make it to the next day. Or you can do what most people do, which is just stay far away from the Conjuring House. Most people don't want anything to do with the story or the energy that resides there, and I definitely don't blame them. But if you're into the spooky, creepy stuff and you want to see the house, if you find yourself in Rhode Island, I definitely recommend driving by it at least, because it is really cool to see in real life. And of course, this is not the only spooky, scary, haunted location here in Rhode Island. This is a really old, creepy state with a super dark history, and I'm excited to share with you guys some other locations that are just as haunted and spooky. But on that note, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate your guys' support. If you like today's story, definitely follow and support on Instagram and YouTube and all the other platforms that this podcast lives on. You can find all of those in the link tree in my bio on Instagram. And don't forget to tune in to next week's episode where I'm going to be talking about Eastern State Penitentiary, which is another super haunted location that I'm very excited to share with you guys. I've actually been there and it is very creepy. But until then, stay spooky and happy Halloween.